This is All Things Cancer, the podcast of the National Foundation for Cancer Research, hosted by NFCR President and CEO, Dr. Sujuan Ba. Each episode explores the hindsight, insights, and foresight of cancer research and care, and how NFCR and its partners are accelerating the path to cures.
Welcome to All Things Cancer. I'm your host, Dr. Sujuan Ba. Today, I'm joined by Kathy Giusti, founder of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, and a true pioneer in transforming how cancer nonprofits drive drug development. At 37 years old, she was told that she had only 3 years to live. Kathy turned urgency into action, building a powerful collaborative model that brought together academia, industry, regulators, and the patients to accelerate new treatments. The result? Survival rates in multiple myeloma have more than doubled, with over 15 new therapies approved. We discussed her book, Fatal to Fearless, the power of strategy and leadership in cancer research, and what it takes to build a system that truly put patients first. Let's jump in. Hi, Kathy. Welcome to All Things Cancer podcast. I'm so glad we have this opportunity to talk about all the wonderful accomplishments you made over the last 30 years. And I also wanted to pick your brain for a lot of things urgent for cancer research and patient care. But first, I would like to talk with you about your recent book, Fatal to Fearless, the 12 steps to breaking cancer in a broken medical system. And this is, I have to say, one of the best and thorough guidebooks I have ever read for cancer patients. And your care for cancer patients and your commitment to helping cancer patients is just jumping out of every page. So I'm very impressed. And I love to hear how you come up with this 12 steps concept. You know, this is a fantastic framework.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. The book was really a culmination of my lifelong experience of having been a patient and then having been the founder and leader of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. I mean, you know this very well, too. Once you start working in healthcare, and once you start working in blood cancers, and then, of course, I started working across all cancers, you become the place that everybody calls when they get a cancer diagnosis. And what I found over the years was whether I was working with myeloma patients or breast cancer patients or other people that were calling me, was the way I was working with them and coaching them was very consistent. It didn't matter what kind of cancer you had. I was trying to coach you to get the best that you could out of our current medical system. And so it really dawned on me that I wanted to put something together that every patient could benefit from, because obviously my coaching people on a one-to-one basis was not going to be sustainable or have the value that I was really looking for. So one of the great things was when I was working up at Harvard Business School as a senior fellow teaching, you know, some of the models and things that we had done at the MMRF, an area that we worked on was called the Right Track. And we were working across all the cancer foundations and really trying to develop what was the right path for our patients to take. And that was the beginning of my putting together those 12 steps. And, you know, the Prostate Cancer Foundation was using it, breast cancer, a number of groups. The MMRF still uses the Right Track. And so the book really was a culmination of that. But what I loved most about writing the book was, and this is probably why you liked it, a lot of time publishers want you to write a how-to or a memoir. They don't really want you to write both because they don't know where to put it in the stacks.
Very hard to put together.
They're very hard to write. They really are. But the beauty was I had started writing a journal from the day I was diagnosed, you know, thinking that
that's a fantastic behavior.
I didn't know that
behavior, I should say.
Yeah, I was just trying to leave something for our 18-month-old daughter, knowing that I was going to be, dead in 3 years. And so I started putting this together for her. And now I had, 30 journals for every year I never expected to live. And I went back and read every journal over again. And so you can imagine what it's like to read your life and read between the lines and think to yourself, I wish I'd done that, or I wish I hadn't done this. And to really understand the mistakes and to be able to give that to the patients too, because I think it's really important. And I think the book works for both patients and caregivers from that perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I recently lost my mother to colon cancer.
I'm sorry.
And it was so fast, but we never knew enough. And
Right.
it was never enough time for you to process all the information, do the right thing. You second guess
Yeah, of course.
all the time. So
Yeah.
this book, I think, is going to be so useful to
I'm
millions
glad.
of patients. You set up the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation 2 years after you got diagnosed with multiple myeloma, being told you only have 3 years to live. So tell me your early journey about setting up the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation and your funding mechanism was so different from any other charities. I joined the National Foundation for Cancer Research in 1999 as a chief scientific officer, and I have watched your foundations and your program, your design, very early on. So I'd love to hear now in person. How did you come up with this quite unique funding model, working with industry, and also what kind of gaps you saw at that time? You knew you had to do something very different.
Yes, I think being diagnosed at the age of 37, I was happily married. We just bought our first home. My daughter was 18 months old. You get this life sentence, like you're going to live 3 years and that's it. Obviously, you are now.
Very scary.
It's very scary, and you are working urgently, right? And at the time, I mean, in all honesty, I was just thinking to myself, how am I going to get through the days and how am I going to get through my treatment? But what happened was I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, first at Merck and then at Searle, which is now part of Pfizer. And I was doing worldwide operations at Searle when I was diagnosed with myeloma. And what happened was a bit of serendipity where they were working on a United Way campaign. And the woman that was running it said, everybody wants to donate to research on your behalf, because obviously it was a huge surprise that I'd been diagnosed with this horrible illness. And I had a high profile job at Searle. So it turned out everybody was donating. And I thought to myself, well, this is amazing and lovely, but I have to put this somewhere. So thank goodness my identical twin sister is an attorney. And we actually set up a community fund. That was the easiest way to go about doing this. And we raised money there and we were staying as a community fund, but then we ended up doing fundraiser. And the first one was highly successful. It was her contacts, my contacts. And next thing we knew, the community foundation was saying, you can't be here as a fundraiser. Like you have to become a 501c3. And I really didn't want to. I was, raising an 18-month-old and dealing with this fatal disease. And I was what they call a reluctant entrepreneur, but they said, you can do this. Like, it looks like you and your sister can do it. And so,
wow, that's a good story. I don't think many people knew about
I know.
that part.
Yeah. So we moved into a 501c3, and then I started running the organization. And you are right on the fundraising side. Some of it is just being fortunate. I had come from a background in pharma, but I'd also gone to Harvard Business School. My husband also, we met at Harvard Business School. And so my first annual appeal went out to, our 800 classmates.
Oh, wow.
This has
That's
just
a good
happened.
network.
It was a great network. It really was. And so we went out to all of them. And indeed, I was very fortunate that one of our closest classmates gave me my first $1 million donation in an early appeal. And that got me into an office with, an executive assistant and then a development person. And so I started building from there. And what I learned.
And that shows your leadership, your influence, even when you were in industry sector.
Yes, I mean, that's really what was happening because I would reach out. My sister was working in media and communications as an attorney. She had a nice network. I did too, but it's really the ability to have the guts to ask people to help you.
Yeah.
And I think that came down to, well, what is the marketing? What am I trying to do? What is my appeal? Why would people fund me? Why would they support me? And I do think because of my training in healthcare and at the business school and things like this, I was focused on the business of science and people were willing to support me. It did keep us, which was very unusual for a nonprofit. It did keep us at what I called high level fundraising, which was great because we had a good database and we would start building that way. We weren't necessarily focused on direct mail, getting the $25 donation.
Yes. You
The
are the high end.
We were at the high end, but the
Yes.
downside of that was those donors would always expect to see me or my sister or
Yes.
somebody that was at a high level in the organization. So you have to be careful of how you build your organization and where the stress points might be. Over time, we tried to really adjust our fundraising so that it would be 1/3 events, 1/3 corporate, and 1/3 major philanthropy. And we would try to
So
balance
you
it out
don't
that way.
necessarily do the grassroots
The
solicitation.
events is a lot of our grassroots work, and
Yeah.
now because of the beauty of the digital world, it's much easier to do grassroots fundraising. So the MMRF does, a lot more of it because you can do it rapidly. Back then when we were first starting, it was a lot of work to do that kind of
Oh,
thing.
I knew that, even
Yeah,
though I didn't even start the organization, but
yeah.
I know the degree of the extensive
Yeah.
efforts going into it.
It's a lot, and I think the fundraising can be the hardest part. When you do the major donor side too, because myeloma skewed older male and African American, it wasn't like we had tons and tons of, billionaires, multi-millionaires that were necessarily supporting the disease. So over time, what I had to really do was focus on our ability to generate new models,
New
to
model, yes.
design new models, and those models could be used in other cancers. And then I would find major donors that wanted to see how we were doing it and learn from us, and they would fund us as well so that we would keep moving ahead of where they were. And that tended to be highly successful as well.
I think you are one of the few charities that dare to start working with industry directly. At least from what I see, you utilize drug assets
Mhm.
from the industry sectors, biotech, and then you raise money, you fund those programs at major academic centers. I noticed that in your design of this funding network, you deliberately stayed away owning any future intellectual properties. You just focus on advancing the drug development. That is quite unique because many people wanted to own the intellectual
Mhm.
properties. So share with me how you come up with that concept and how does that influence
Mhm.
others.
I think it came from, my background was working at the Gillette company, which was direct to consumer, and then working in the pharmaceutical industry. And I think because of my background in the pharmaceutical industry, where I was very comfortable was bringing together stakeholders in certain diseases. So when I was at Searle, for example, I was an expert in the field of arthritis, but I was always working with academics, FDA, arthritis patients to understand how do we launch new drugs? What's the most effective way to go? So I would love to tell you that I was hugely brilliant. Instead, I was just using the skills I knew. So what I did was I said, okay, well, let's look at the oncology network. We know within this network, there are academic centers, there are community centers, there's the FDA. Of course, coming from pharma, of course, I wanted to focus on biotech and pharmaceutical companies. And then there was the patient side too, as well as NCI. So my joy was doing the roundtables and bringing people together and just listening.
Mhm.
And then because of my business background, we really focused on what the incentives were. So of course it was going to be that academia needed to publish, they needed to get their grants, they needed funding. Of course that, we were going to look at pharma and they have shareholders. So it was very much sitting down and saying, what's going to drive everybody? I think the success of the MMRF, and I write about this a lot when I was up at Harvard, is it's three elements. It's strategy, leadership, and money. The strategy came down to the fact that we were never going to raise as much money necessarily as the NCI for, multiple myeloma, although back when we started, we actually were doing pretty well. And so the question became, if you were bringing the leaders together within the pharmaceutical industry, FDA, all these different groups, what leaders were you bringing together? And I would always pick the ones that were most collaborative
Yeah.
and still were at the highest level to be able to make the decisions in the room and stick with it. And I would change the leadership over time because, somebody might be very thoughtful in terms of being able to compromise. When you have everybody at a table and you're trying to develop a new tissue banking model or a new data sharing model, not everybody's going to get everything they want. But if you have the right leaders in the room and you're focused on a strategy that you all believe in, you will get there. The last part, which you already talked about before, was if we were going to design these models and everybody was going to be a part of them, the best way to keep everybody engaged was to provide the funding.
Yeah.
And so if
it's
we
the glue,
it's the glue.
very
Yeah,
necessary glue.
yes. And I used to say to people, especially very early on when we were first started, it was much easier back then to create this incredible tight collaboration because there was no funding in myeloma. There was no awareness. It was
And
just
at that time, not
nothing.
very many viable options, right?
No,
Not even
nothing.
one good drug.
Right. So it was really like the fact that we were able to convene everybody, raise enough money to be able to support some of these early models, and then show the models were working. Those were like some of my favorite days because you could move and everybody was playing the same way. Of course, when cancer starts to really blossom, like multiple myeloma did over time, now there's so much success that it really pulls people apart because now everybody needs to be taking credit for different things. So I actually feel like the collaboration was easier early on than it was later. But if you develop the right model and the right approach, it doesn't even have to be the most expensive model. It just has to be something that other people aren't doing. It amazes me how you can keep everybody together. So look, curing cancer is a team effort.
Yeah, we should
Not
have
one person's going to do it.
We should have the collaborative mindset. We cannot continue to use the zero-sum approach, right? Especially in nonprofit sectors, that's very prevalent. I always say, no, I want to build a collaborative network and working with people who share the same passion, same interest, and nice to work with.
Yes. Yeah. People make a big, big difference. You can tell the ones that were very patient focused and were willing to make some sacrifices to get things done.
And that's why NFCR actually was the instrumental founder and organizer convener for the GBM Agile.
Yes.
So we were the early founder. GBM Agile Adaptive Platform seemed to be very risky, and 135 people worldwide. Are they going to make a difference? Many people were skeptical. So that's how we believe in working collaboratively to make a difference.
Yeah, which is great because, even adaptive trial design is challenging. And the more that we all share how we do that well, the better off we all are.
And especially there was no precedent. So we were trying to design the master protocol that the trials can go from phase 2 all the way to registration if the drug asset graduates from the pipeline. So no seamless process. Yeah.
Yes.
So I totally understand what you were trying to do at Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. But still, I bet you had to deal with some concerns, some questions about the conflict of interest, working with drug companies and the neutrality, liability, all those things. How did you balance those out? How do you convince everybody?
Well, I think one of the other things that we did was, number one, it was all about relationships. So an example would be when we were working on all the legal issues, we had a great attorney at the MMRF. She's actually still there. And when there would be consistent legal concerns about things, she would bring in her own roundtable of the attorneys. So maybe we were having trouble because it was Mayo and Moffat and Dana-Farber and all these people, and people weren't agreeing on what the contracts were going to look like. She would get an agreement, and then she would reach a point, and I think we did this quite well overall at the MMRF. We'd reach a point where we would get to an agreement. So an example might be we did a clinical consortium, as you know, the
Yes.
MMRC. It's still
Yes.
functioning today. And so what happened was we finally got the first 4 centers to agree on what was the membership agreement. And she worked really, really hard on that. But over time,
So you design a master agreement. Everybody
master
had
agreement.
to agree and sign on.
Yes, and she would do that. I would work with the scientists, and the scientists would then work with their attorneys at the centers because, of course, they wanted to get this done. They
Yeah.
wanted to be part of this clinical network. And she would work with the attorneys, and it would all come together. Once we had one agreement, though, if somebody new was coming into the MMRC, they had to abide by that agreement. It was like take it or leave it at that point. And that made it easier as we started to expand. And
So
over
I think
time,
that probably was your secret sauce. You actually scaled up very quickly. I
yeah.
was just watching from far, right? I said, wow, Kathy is rolling.
Yeah, we did. I will say we did move very fast, but I think that's
Yes.
again, that's a little bit of having a patient that thinks they have 3 years to live at the helm of every meeting.
Right? You cut through
Yeah,
a lot of crap. You don't want any barrier in your way. That was fantastic, very impactful, Kathy.
thank you.
And a lot of people also worry about influence from the industry. So how did you balance out that?
I had a different perspective because I came from industry, right? So I knew from my own standpoint that I never worked at Merck or at Searle with the intent of, oh, this is all about the money and the shareholders. I mean, I went into healthcare because my father was a physician, my mom was a nurse, and I loved the business side of things. And so I loved it. So I think my perspective of being working with the pharmaceutical industry and biotech industries, I was grateful. The interesting thing in myeloma, however, is that we were very focused early on in immunotherapy. We were doing
Yes.
vaccines. Our first roundtable was with the NCI on vaccine therapy and stem cell transplant and how the immune system was working.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your book.
Yes. But then out of a bit of serendipity, we had done roundtables on angiogenesis. And then all of a sudden we're realizing, oh my goodness, thalidomide, is an option. That was actually a patient, I write about this in the book too, who came up with that and asked for Bart Barlegi to put her husband on thalidomide. And it didn't work for her husband, but it worked for the next patient, which was just incredible. And now that is teaching us that novel drugs could potentially work in the field of myeloma. So we shifted from tons of grants on dendritic cell vaccines and DNA vaccines and roundtables in that field over to novel drug. And again, when you're a small organization, you can be nimble and say, okay, well, what does this mean? So we were helping Celgene quite a bit in terms of raising awareness. I mean, it was the scuttlebutt was getting around, but the internet was just starting, right? So we're helping to educate people on this new opportunity that was becoming available. And then over time, just quickly after that, Julian Adams came to us with Velcade. And again, we were setting up a roundtable meeting that I was having with all of our academic investigators. And Julian was telling me about this amazing drug that they had all comers, and a myeloma patient did really well and went into a complete response. And he asked if he could take over my meeting. And at the MMRF, and I'm like, of course. So next thing we knew, they had, started designing what would they do with this drug if we moved it into myeloma. And it just ended up saving months and months and months of time because we were the convening agent for so many people and they could drop it in. So I was very much focused on how we could work with pharma and biotech. I never viewed them as an obstacle. It was always an opportunity.
So I think that has a lot with your expertise and your background. And that's something not every leader in a nonprofit has. when you started working, taking the company drug to the clinical centers, did you have to convince the drug company to co-invest with you about advancing those clinical trials, or you have to take on a certain portion of the preclinical or phase 1 studies?
Well, again, based off of sitting down with everybody and convening and saying, if we develop the MMRC, which was our clinical network, what would be the strategy? What was the mission? What was the goal behind setting up this clinical network? And so before we actually designed, because it became its own 501c3 at one point as well, before we did all of that work, we all agreed on what it would do. And so I did that with the scientific and clinical community. And what we decided was it would do phase 1 and 2 trials. We would never get to a phase 3 trial because it would be too hard for us to raise that money. And if we had done a heavy lift on phase 1 and 2, of course, the pharma company would take it over at phase 3. And so that's where we would do a lot of the funding. And so we would fund and they would also co-fund. And a lot of times it was also getting free drug available from different counterparts. And so that became really important. And what I really love, and I think is important for the MMRC, is to do the studies that other people wouldn't necessarily do.
So you started looking for those drug assets that had high potentials, but a lot of people wouldn't take on.
Right.
And then you convene those trials, and you started as an investigator-initiated trial programs?
Yes, we did those, and then we would work with them on some of the pharma-sponsored ones as well.
That was a very smart, speedy model to get the drugs to the market. And your effort paid out. Right now we have more than 15 approvals, right? Those drugs are approved for multiple myeloma patients.
Yeah, and I think that again was just showing like we had a great community. We still have a great community in myeloma. And I think part of that is the drug companies worked well with us. We worked well with them. We helped get enrollment because, again, we had the patient database. We could tell people where the trials were. But I think we also had an amazing relationship with FDA. I mean, Rick Pastor was phenomenal to work with. We would go down there as often as we could. We didn't just go down when a drug needed to be approved. We would go down and try to say, okay, here's where we are. We're developing this study. We're doing this study. And just try to keep those communications open. And I think that really did help us overall, that we were a tight-knit community. I think myeloma is still a very tight-knit community and still doing phenomenal work.
Yeah, and right now the survival rate is tripled, right, compared to 30 years ago.
It's really funny because I just was mentioning to the MMRF, I'm working on this presentation now, but when I started, it was in the 20s. And they were just saying in the ACS Cancer Facts and Figures that the 5-year survival went from 32 to 62. And that is really remarkable. I mean, for a rare tumor to have that kind of progress, I think it probably is the poster child of how to move forward. And I think the whole focus for the MMRF now is how do you move from a 5-year survival of 32 to 62 to 92? Like, we're not done yet. Our work is still really important and we have a ways to go. And I think that's why we're all still working together.
You also set up the Myeloma Investment Fund in 2009. And I believe you were one of the first nonprofit leaders to operationalize this investment in oncology. It took me more than 10 years to get permission from my board to allow me to do venture model. So that's why I mentioned to you, we set up the Aim High Accelerator Fund back in 2019. Which is a different model from your myeloma investment fund. Yours is within the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. The Aim High Accelerator Fund is actually standalone nonprofit tax-exempt affiliate with NFCR. Tell me more about myeloma investment fund and why did you choose to do it within the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, and what kind of obstacles you had to overcome to set it up?
So I think the beauty of the MMRF is our ability to write these phenomenal strategic plans. As I said in the very beginning, the success of the MMRF, and I think any nonprofit, comes down to strategy, leadership, and the ability to raise the funds to support your programs. And so we move from a collaborative tissue bank to working with the Broad to sequence the genome and be the first to sequence the myeloma genome, to develop a clinical network that I just talked to you about, the MMRC, to then doing data sharing with Compass. And so every time we would write a strategic plan, you're saying to yourself, well, what is it that we need to solve for now? What's the most important thing we're going to solve for now? And when I was writing that next strategic plan, what we were looking at was the fact that daratumumab and some of these antibodies were starting to look really nice in myeloma, and it was a crowded field. Like, to a lot of pharma companies, it looked crowded. And
Yes.
so we were thinking, how do we get some of these immune biotech companies to come in? And that really moved us forward to start the Myeloma Investment Fund. At that point in time, I was a senior fellow up at Harvard Business School. I was giving my time, half time to the MMRF and half time to Harvard Business School. My husband, another Harvard Business School grad, was now running the MMRF while I was at Harvard. And together, what really happened was I was working with the T1D fund up at Harvard Business School. That was
Oh,
started by JDRF, if you remember.
yes.
And
Yes.
we were doing a whole area of venture funding while I was at Harvard Business School and really looking into these models. And my husband was over at the MMRF, and we just kind of said, okay, this is the time to really do a venture fund at the MMRF because we really need these immune companies to come our way. So what we decided to do, and again, kudos to T1D for sharing their model with us. I felt like it took us way too long to develop this fund at the MMRF, to be honest with you. But by doing it, we said, okay, we will put together the funding for this, and we will pursue the biotech companies, especially that are doing work in immunotherapy. And we were able to raise $5 million from an initial funder and then get it matched by a second funder, going back again to our major donor approach of being high end at the MMRF. And so with that funding, we were able to keep building on the Myeloma Investment Fund. Now, it has its own board and its own group that really focuses on just the Myeloma Investment Fund. But you are right, the returns come back into
Yeah.
MMRF, but to the Myeloma Investment Fund itself. So, and if the MMRF wants to give money over to the Myeloma Investment Fund, they can do that as well. But right now, I mean, it's done very well in terms of bringing in new immune therapies for our patients. And a lot of the biotech companies have, really joined us. The reason they like our Myeloma Investment Fund is not necessarily the funding, which of course they enjoy, but it's not hard for them to get some of that funding, but it's because we collaborate with them. It may be that they need answers from us on certain tissue data, immune profiling information. So they love the fact that they can come to us, not just for the funding, but for the expertise.
So you build an ecosystem,
Yes.
and that's the platform they need.
Yes.
So how many companies have you helped with, and what is one deal that you are most proud of?
Well, I think it's the fact that there's a lot, over 15 companies that work with us, but I think the beauty of it has been the fact that now it can be self-sustaining because, what happens is, the companies move out, you get the funding back in. And again, I think the ability to turn that around and keep investing in companies that move to the clinic, that's the greatest joy for us. I think it's also the fact that when you look again at the strategic plan and you say, what is myeloma struggling with right now? It's the fact that we have these amazing CAR T therapies, we have these amazing bispecifics, but what do we need to do? We need to generate access for patients everywhere in the rural community, out at the community settings. And so a lot of the focus in the Immune Fund has been, okay, well, how do we get some of those more community-friendly type approaches for our patients? How do we get new approaches that the side effects might be down? So I feel like that's where we've really been able to shine. But I would be remiss in not saying at the same time that we've been lucky to work with some phenomenal pharmaceutical companies. if you look at J&J, for example, their pipeline in myeloma has been extraordinary. I mean, you look at the bispecific, trispecifics, CAR T, and their focus on curing the disease. As a big pharma company, I give them a lot of credit. It's been pretty phenomenal seeing what they've been able to get done and combination approaches that they're able to work on.
How about those biotech companies? They have wonderful drug assets, the technology platforms, but they just didn't have enough investment, and it's very difficult to raise money for the companies that before phase 1. So how do you view this space? Did you have them in your initial design of funding?
Yeah, so I think when we were doing the Myeloma Investment Fund, we knew that that would be biotech companies. So our focus there was, okay, we'll work directly with them, not only in giving them funding, but also in helping to answer questions they might have. But the real beauty of it was the fact that once we were giving them funding, other funders would look at it and say, oh, the MMRF, which does really good due diligence, is supporting this biotech, maybe we should too. So I think we were a bit of a good housekeeping seal on some of these companies that, helped encourage additional funding for them too, which
That's exactly what I see from Aim High Accelerator Fund.
yeah.
And we convene the committees and we evaluate and we conduct the due diligence. Once we give them the funding, it becomes a golden seal and a good endorsement. So other funders come in.
Exactly.
But it's still a very challenging space.
It is. It definitely is. And it's interesting too. I think this gets back to your first question to me, which is why did we focus on high-level donors? It's a lot of high-level donors that are in our myeloma investment fund, and they like getting the heads up. And a lot of them came from financial backgrounds, and they really enjoy being part of that investment fund. So I think that's been, again, when you're looking at a donor to say, will you just kick us off with 5 million and the next one 5 million? Those are your high net worth donors that care deeply about this.
The high net wealth donor will give you the donations. And then you get going, then they can always fund later, right?
Yes.
De-risk their investment.
Yes. So it's a trick because you always have to convince your high net worth donors that your models are working.
Yes.
And that your models are being shared. I think that's really important. So that's why I love it when we can get online and talk about some of the things we're doing. There's no secret to them. Like, anybody can follow our models. And, we talk to other foundations and other people all the time to share them as much as we possibly can.
That's wonderful to hear. That's exactly what I do for Aim High Accelerator Fund, which is a slightly different variation, a different model because it's a standalone. Someday we can chat more about that. I can pick your brain to see how I can optimize that particular model, which is
a lot of
different
venture models out there. I think this is what I loved about being a senior fellow at Harvard is we would pick different work streams. So we picked direct to patient, we picked data sharing, we picked venture philanthropy, we picked adaptive trial design. We had those 4 work areas, and we would bring together the best in class, and we would talk about our models openly. And it was just, honestly, it was my favorite number of years working across all cancers and all models, because again, everybody wants to share. It's just not well organized to bring people together.
I totally agree.
And I thought when Robert Kraft was doing that kind of work, and that's who was funding all of that work at Harvard, it was so beautifully done. And I felt like it was making such a huge difference for all cancers and for all of the foundations that were trying to share their models. Then COVID hit, and that, we couldn't be convening up at Harvard Business School anymore. And so we put a lot of it online, but I really miss it because I think the ability to convene across diseases and across cancers, it's so worthwhile. And I feel like now that ball has been dropped. Otherwise people like you and I would be talking all the time about our venture models and how it's going. We'd be talking all the time about our adaptive trial designs. And it kind of happens, but there's not a structure to it and an ability to write about it and then send all that information out to the world, which is what we used to do.
And information sharing is critical, but I think you and I could play another role in terms of organizing all the, the like-minded charities, because everybody wanted to advance the drug development, but everybody has limited budgets. The current funding model for biotech is broken. And there's so many good early stage drug assets are idling. Some of the companies are dying because they couldn't bring venture capitalist funding or pharmaceutical funding. If we can come in and put our funding together, organize some concerted effort to help the early stage companies. I'm so pleased to know you are helping all cancers now, because I thought you were only engaged in multiple myeloma. So I'm just thrilled to hear you care about
I did it for so long. I think I was at Harvard for almost 5 years just doing that, and up until COVID hit. And I would do, like I said, half-time at MMRF and half-time up there. And it was the greatest joy for me, because I was up there going across all cancers and all models and sharing knowledge amongst all of us. But I would come back to the MMRF and I was learning as much as I was sharing, so I could come back and give information like the T1D fund, or what was going on in glioblastoma and adaptive trial designs. And I loved the ability, again, to share knowledge across everybody. I think it's one of the most important things we can do.
Absolutely. Maybe I share my model with you and see what we can do to unite all the nonprofit funding. So what's the lesson you learned from the Myeloma Research Fund?
I think the biggest lesson I learned was, number one, it takes a team to cure cancer. Like, it's never going to happen just because one person did something amazing. I think it really
or
was
just good science. Good science is
right.
not enough.
And I think for me, my greatest strength was, at least I tried. My greatest strength was on the business side, and I relied on the scientists to drive the science, and I relied on the clinicians to drive the clinical work. But I was there to listen carefully and understand the incentives that would get us all together, that would truly benefit the patient. And like I said before, I would work with leaders that I really felt shared the same urgency and patient focus that I did. And I was able to find those people, and we developed really long-term relationships. I think the beauty of the MMRF today is that it still does that. It still writes its strategic plan. It still takes that very seriously. It still tries to sit down with the scientists, the clinical, the people in industry to understand what's missing today to get us from a 62% 5-year survival to 92%. How are we going to use immune therapy drugs? How are we going to make sure that these drugs get out to the community setting? How are we going to look at prevention? And so I love continuing to work with them, because I love the strategy, and I love trying to identify who are the players going to be, and how do we incentivize everybody to have that same level of urgency. So I think that's the learning, is it's a team approach, but you do need really good leadership that looks at it from a scientific, clinical, and for me, a business perspective to drive it home. And I think from a patient perspective, the one thing I've learned is that in today's world, the science is moving so incredibly fast. It's a gift, much faster than when I was diagnosed. And so I think the hardest part for the patient is staying on top of it. Like, how do you know what the latest standard of care might be, or where the clinical trials are headed? And I think it's really overwhelming for the patient. So I do try to stay out there on social media, speaking, all those things, to try to help patients understand through the book as well. Like, you've got to be on your game. You can easily have FOMO. You can miss out in today's world if you're not on your game.
And if you are in the treatment for cancer, you have to be your own advocate.
You do.
If you have a loved one dealing with it, you have to be there. Yeah, and the current medical system is just not sufficient enough. And I learned that painfully when I was dealing with my mother's cancer journey.
Yeah, and I think that patients don't, and caregivers, the one thing I want them to know is there are more resources available to patients and caregivers today than ever before. And so I always try to remind them that whether you're reaching out to the medical center or you're reaching out to a patient foundation or you're reaching out to your insurance company, you can get access to social workers, to navigators, to counselors, to case managers. And you don't have to always do it on your own. And I think patients struggle to know what resources are available and who do I call when. And I think that's a really important thing to start educating everybody on.
People can go and get the information, but they are so afraid of asking. And they want to connect with people who had the same experience. Building out a patient forum, share the credible, the real science information in a patient community forum is so important.
Yes.
So
of course. And for me, like that's why I would, having been diagnosed at 37 and then deciding to have another child and all these things, like it's amazing how you can find people in the myeloma community. And we have a complete navigation center at the MMRF with amazing nurse navigators. But it's really incredible to be able to match patients with other patients that look like them, feel like them, that are dealing with the same issues. And I think that that's an amazing resource to give people. Then they don't feel alone.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to find somebody to
I
help
look
you
at
through.
many other patient community hubs and navigators. Yours is one of the best. I love your chat box function. I did some question asking, and I look at the answer, quite impressive.
Yeah, I have to say, our nurse navigators are really amazing. And then I also work now with a company called Time Care. They're a navigation company that's done through the insurance company. And so they are available, and they're available virtual 24/7, and they work across all cancers. So again, it's just a matter of patients knowing where these resources are. And when you're in the thick of it, and I always say that's why the medical system is so broken, our ability to integrate all of our doctors, all of our nurses, our family members, and then try to find these resources, it's just a huge burden on the patient that I wish was just so much simpler.
Another question I want to ask, that's actually a signature program at Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, is your Compass program. Mm-hmm. So that's a bold project you did early on in 2011, right? So tell me more about that, and how did that program play an impact role for the ecosystem you are building, and what's your future view about that, especially in the era of AI?
Yeah, so basically what we went through at the MMRF, and we had talked about this a little bit earlier, was the ability to write strategic plans and to say which models are we really focused on investing in right now. So as we said, it started with just getting scientists into the field through major donors and grant making. Once we got the scientists, we're like, we don't understand the basic biology. So then we said, let's do tissue banking, and then let's do genomic sequencing. So here we are all sitting there, and we're saying, okay, well, we need to understand not just the genomic sequencing of today, what's going on with the patient, if we can pull it off, but we really need the longitudinal data. And so we had a lot of the academic centers there. And as you well know, tissue is gold, data is gold, especially back then to the academic centers. So,
and nobody wanted to give
nobody
out
wanted to share back then. So it would be really funny. Like I'd hold the round table, and the academic centers would kind of hedge and say, "Yeah, well, we'll share." But when push came to shove, and you really tried to get the data, it was very clear. No, it was just really hard to get that sharing done. So we said, "Okay, well, we're going to have to take this on ourselves, and we're going to develop a longitudinal study where we will follow 1,000 patients over a significant period of time." And again, this was a lot of work because you're getting their baseline
expensive
information.
Too.
Yeah, and we had to bring in a CRO, all the case report forms had to be done. It was a very rigid, trial that we were developing. And so our ability to follow these 1,000 patients over time and, being able to see what was happening with them genomically, clinically, everything, was a huge breakthrough for us. And the way we were able to fund it was We paid for it via philanthropy, and then we also would have pharmaceutical partners that would come in, and if you were a pharmaceutical partner, you would get an early look at the data before we sent it out to the public domain for other people to see. And then over time, that data was available to all scientists to work on over time. And so it became one of the best databases in myeloma, well, probably the best database in myeloma. And all scientists could use it. They could understand different genomic signatures. And so it really moved things forward. And again, it was a beautiful publication thing for our academics. They could publish off Compass, so that was a win for them. The pharmaceutical companies were getting information on early data, so that was a win for them. And for patients, we were starting to understand high risk versus standard risk versus low risk patients, and that was a win for us. Compass continues to be a wonderful thing in that now we can go back to those tissue samples and look at the immune profiling and understand what can happen on the immune side too. So the MMRF continues to do some really great work there. And then on AI, they take a lot of their data, and now we're trying to do everything we can to use AI to understand better who does well on certain immune therapies, who doesn't do well. Hopefully over time we can understand faster and better, like how to combine, how to sequence these drugs. Those are the things that we really need to start working with our partners on to speed the process, because I feel like we have incredible immune therapies already between what's in our myeloma investment fund, what's in the pipeline, what's available today. I think the question becomes, how do we combine, sequence, dose these drugs in a way that we can get to a cure?
So you have a treasure mind,
Yes.
for all the good clinical data.
Yes.
Which is incredibly important.
It is. It really is. And hopefully we'll get more data over time. I think that was probably one of the toughest things that we did. Again, I kept thinking to myself, I can't believe that in a broken medical system, because clearly it was broken at this point, we have to invest $40 to $50 million to generate this database ourselves, because we cannot find a way to get the academic centers to share. I think it's better now. And note to everybody, this was not clinicians or scientists saying they wouldn't share. It's just the way the system was working.
Oh, the institution barrier.
It's the institution. It's never the people. They don't go to medical school or get their PhD, to stop science. Of course, they want to get it done, but people's hands were tied.
So that's why I think you are not only a cancer survivor and cancer patient advocate and nonprofit leader, you are also a builder to change system. So you build a powerful platform, the engine to deploy systematic capitals to accelerate the drug development. And you also have a platform to enable people to share and to do things better. So that's an incredible legacy you have built, Kathy.
Thank you.
So you are no longer the CEO of MMRF, and you teach at Harvard Business School. And what's the moment that you figure out that you wanted to step off from the CEO role? And that is something I think many people, many long-term leaders or founders wrestle with. So love to hear some of your insights.
I did, as a founder, I wrestled with it and I didn't handle it well. I have to be honest with you. It's one of the biggest challenges that you have. I ended up turning the MMRF over. Got the phone call pretty quickly that said, Robert Kraft has given a donation to Harvard Business School. He wants it to focus in the field of precision medicine. The dean of Harvard Business School had known of all my work at the MMRF, and they contacted me and said, we would love for you to come up here and run this program. And I, at that point, had a mother with melanoma. My identical twin sister had stage 3 breast cancer. My dad had previously died of kidney cancer. And I really wanted to work across all cancers. And so I got this opportunity and I said, I really, really want to take this. And so the person I reached out to was my husband, because he was too a Harvard Business School grad. He understood what we were doing at the MMRF, and he understood a lot of our major donors. I mean, he'd gone on a lot of those trips with me because you're often with a spouse, and he knew everybody.
Your
He'd done
husband
every
is.
event. And so, but I will tell you, it's not easy to work with your spouse.
Oh, I
It's
knew that
really not.
from my own experience.
And I took him away from, a career that he liked, and he did this, and he did an amazing job. And I think in some ways, it probably helped that I really wanted to do this all cancer work up at Harvard. Not because I didn't want to do the work at the MMRF. I was lucky. I was still chief mission officer there. I was still writing the strategic plan. And I was making our plans better because I was learning so much from everybody else up at Harvard. It was a win-win. But now my husband's doing this, and then COVID hits.
Oh,
And it's time for both of us. I was only supposed to be at Harvard for 2 years. I was there for almost 4 to 5, and now he's still at the MMRF. And we're like, okay, you need to move out, and we had to make this transition. I was very fortunate again, though. The person writing the strategic plan with me on immunotherapy and the venture fund was at a consulting firm, and I thought he was phenomenal, and he was doing a really, really great job. And so my husband and I decided, let's have him work as our COO. So I called the consulting firm and asked if I could steal him and if we could make him the COO. And then we had him work as the COO for a certain period of time, and then moved him into the CEO role. And it has worked really, really well. And he's done a phenomenal job. I think because he knew the culture, he knew exactly what he was getting into when he took the job. And I think it's great to have another set of eyes and ears on an organization that has, new ideas, but still understands the culture. And the chief mission officer at the MMRF has been with me almost since I started. And she's still the chief mission officer, and I talk to her all the time. So, and being on the board, I try to make sure the founder, the CEO gets to do what he wants to do because he's, on a great path. And it's one of those things where I'm very happy that it's been turned over, to be honest with you.
So if you have to build another institution today, what type of problems would you like to tackle, and how differently would you build the new institution if you had to build a new one?
Well, even looking now at the MMR, because I am like working with them and talking with them about how you move from 32 to 62 to 92, the changes that have come about that I think are really, really important are, number one, our understanding now of early diagnosis and prevention. So, back when I was diagnosed for smoldering myeloma, you wouldn't do anything. Well, in today's world, you might. If you're high risk smoldering, we now have drugs like daratumumab you can go on, and the ability to diagnose patients early would be incredible. So there would be a huge component of the plan that would focus on that, even talking to primary care doctors. I think the second part is looking at the world of MRD and how does that change the fact that we can now determine whether patients are in a deep response. Do they need to stay on treatment? Do they not? Can we move them off? How quickly can we change therapies based off of what we're learning on the current treatments? I think another place that has changed dramatically for us is that we now have a surrogate endpoint. So that was another huge coup by the myeloma community, that we have surrogate endpoints that we can now move drug development faster. And then I think the other is AI. So AI is going to change everything for us in data management, answering questions that we all have. But I think the other way that's really important is the direct-to-consumer efforts. The way patients are getting educated today is in 30-second sound bites. It's just completely different than how I was doing it. They've got ChatGPT. There's so many places they can go. So just looking at all of these trends scientifically, clinically, technologically, consumerism, you would write a new plan. But for me, it's not like it is a new plan, but it's kind of the resilience of saying, we want to take it to the finish line. And, I'll be here for the MMRF to do whatever I can to help them write that plan, because I think, again, I'm a business person. It all comes down to what you're putting in writing and how do you make the right leaders and incentives come into play now. Who are you partnering with on the AI side? You don't,
and why you partner with.
And why you partner, exactly. And again, you're still back into who owns what, but it's so that all of those elements still haven't changed. It's still strategy, leadership, and money.
I think the AI world, the intellectual property is going to be even more complicated.
Yes.
And so we should explore more models. I think your research model of working with industry is a very good one to share. Yes.
I always say that to everybody, like I think it's one thing, the best models that we develop, you're not doing everything yourself because you can't be an expert in everything. I think the beauty of a really good model is that you've brought in the best expertise in every which way, and that you are all collaborating together with a common goal.
And have a win-win mindset instead of I win, you lose.
Yes.
Zero sum. Yes.
And that the win becomes the patient, and that if the patients in myeloma win, then may we also develop that model in glioblastoma or pancreatic or wherever else.
Yeah, exactly.
Can benefit.
Yeah. Well, Kathy, you are such an iconic leader for the field. You change the perception of nonprofit. What you have done actually demonstrated to the world. The nonprofit organizations can make impacts, can shape the change, and can shape the market even. That's the message I love to amplify. And thank you so much for what you have done and what you make the impossible and possible.
Well, thank you. I mean, I have so much respect for the nonprofit field and the great work that's being done. So it's always a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you. And the patient needs you to continue to push the boundary.
I'll be here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All Things Cancer. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss future conversations. To learn more about how the National Foundation for Cancer Research is working with the global research community to make cures possible, visit nfcr.org. You can also reach us directly at 800-321-CURE.